So, Mission Impossible 8 came out about a month ago, and I only saw it last week. So, this review is late, but I think I've sat on it about long enough to really give my thoughts on it. This will be a spoiler review, so if you haven't seen it, I would recommend you go watch it, and then you come back to this. But with all that out of the way, my full thoughts. Mission Impossible as a series is meant to be a bunch of self-contained adventures that require no context in order to enjoy. And Mission Impossible 8 isn't that. It requires at least a cursory knowledge of Dead Reckoning before going into it. Normally, I wouldn't have a problem with this. A lot of Marvel movies require you to watch the past ones, but they generally summarize it to where you can go in blind. And Mission Impossible 8 does that as well, but I don't think it works as well for Mission Impossible 8 than it would for, say, an Avengers movie because of what Mission Impossible is. Mission Impossible as a series is meant to be a bunch of self-contained adventures, and that's not what The Final Reckoning is doing. To be clear, my problem isn't that it continues the story from Dead Reckoning. I actually like that as a plot element. But it's that it does so in such a Frankenstein way that it's hard to really enjoy. My main issue with The Final Reckoning is that it tries to tie all of the movies together to the point where it ends up being a greatest hits album and not its own movie. There is a 30-minute clip show at the beginning to tie everything up. And were this like another movie series, I might be okay with it. But because Mission Impossible is supposed to be self-contained adventures, I'm not willing to give it as much grace. And then there is the frequent callbacks. By my count, Mission Impossible 1's plot and Mission Impossible 3's plot become relevant once again in this movie. And they go through a lot of hoops to try and remind you what happened. Now, normally I'd be okay with this, but the movie's wasting time. And at almost 3 hours, it's time not well spent. You probably could have just condensed the first 30 minutes into 10 and ran from there. And it really shows that they were kind of running out of ideas in terms of what to put for a story. The plot in a Mission Impossible movie is really just a way to connect all the various set pieces, which are the central marketing of the movie. And The Final Reckoning has about 2 interesting set pieces by my count, but I personally found them a little bit underwhelming. The scene you're probably most familiar with is Tom Cruise dangling from the side of the biplane, and I'm just a little bit less impressed by that because he's been doing these death-defying stunts since about 2013 in the movies, or really the early 2000s if you want to go back to the knife fight. But I find that after dangling out of a helicopter and dangling from the side of a plane in Mission Impossible 5 and 6, that what he's doing with the biplane, while still technically impressive, I personally didn't find it as exhilarating as I did those other 2 sequences. The movie risks these crazy stunts becoming the norm and losing their pizzazz in the process. The set piece I actually found really interesting, and the one I liked, was when he was running around the sunken submarine. This isn't as perilous as dangling from a plane, but I think it shows a little bit more of Ethan's resourcefulness as he's running around an environment that could at any moment kill him, including being that far underwater. If I were to pick apart one issue with the submarine, it would be that near the end of that sequence, it breaks the movie's logic just a little bit. I hate talking about logic breaking in movies, but when at the beginning of the scene, they very clearly establish a consequence for getting rid of the decompressor, and then he gets rid of the decompressor and that consequence doesn't come, that's when I feel the movie has jumped the shark a little bit. But other than that detail, I think the submarine does show a little bit of a different side of the stunts that Mission Impossible is capable of. So the writing and the set pieces are my 2 major complaints with the movie. I have a few more, but none that warrant as much detail. So we're going to do them in a little bit of a rapid fire. So first up is Haley Atwell's character, Grace. This is no shade to Haley Atwell, but I felt that the way they introduced her character in Dead Reckoning was very heavy-handed, and they didn't really try to cover up that they were replacing Rebecca Ferguson, whom, personally, I love. I think she's the highlight of the series. And, like, I really don't like how they killed her in Dead Reckoning, but I understand why she didn't want to keep doing the movies. It's just in that, like, comparison where I feel Grace doesn't really hold up to Ilsa Faust. The other issue is I don't think Grace really meshes well with the rest of the team in the same way that Ilsa did. It felt like Rebecca Ferguson very clearly had a lot of chemistry with Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg and Tom Cruise in a way that Haley Atwell doesn't, and they kind of don't give her the opportunity either. Let me see. No, they do. They do, and she's just not really given that opportunity. And the last thing I really take issue with Grace's character is that the writers decided to make her a romantic love interest for Ethan. The last time that Ethan had a love interest was in Mission Impossible 3. They brought her back a little bit for Fallout, which I liked. But these characters in Mission Impossible, which it's not even a character-focused movie to begin with, don't have personal lives, and I don't see why they should only start getting them when you're ending off the series. The other thing I took issue with in The Final Reckoning is the sheer number of Batman gambits, of which I counted maybe 4. And after, like, the second one, it starts to feel cheap and contrived, and more so how the writers dig themselves out of a hole they dug for themselves, rather than a way to show off how clever Ethan is. At the end of the day, I probably would watch The Final Reckoning again, but only if the other options weren't good. I paid $5 on a Tuesday afternoon to watch this, and I probably wouldn't pay more than 10. I'm willing to cut it a lot of slack because Mission Impossible has built up a lot of this good grace just over the past decade or two, but it really puts that to the test, and it just barely passes. Tom Cruise is still probably the biggest draw, and since he's getting up there in age, there's not much left he can do, really. Stunt-wise. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and maybe I'll do this again, maybe I won't, maybe I'll do a different movie. I'll have to see how well this video does. Or maybe I'll just go back to not posting. That seems to work for me. But let me know what you think in the comments, and have a good rest of your day. Bye!